After 2 days of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law staying at my house, my daughter suddenly cried in the middle of the night. I was shocked when she showed me a note taped to her bedroom door. It read, "Your cats have been thrown away. We don't like cats. Don't make us uncomfortable living here." That night, I said nothing, and I did something. The next morning, when they woke up, they screamed hysterically. But before this story begins, please write in the comments section where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so the Midnight Tales channel can continue to grow and bring you even more gripping stories. Emily looked around the living room of her house with a sense of peace she silently thanked God for every day. This house was not merely a place to live, it was a precious inheritance from her late parents. Every corner held memories of her childhood, now lovingly preserved as she lived there with her husband and daughter. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the ventilation gaps, illuminating the clean, gleaming tiled floor. In one corner of the room, 3 beloved cats, Milo, Luna, and Kiko, were curled up asleep on a soft fur rug. The atmosphere was calm and soothing, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Lily, Emily's only daughter, just 9 years old, sat cross-legged near the cats while reading a storybook. This scene was the definition of simple happiness for Emily. She smiled faintly, adjusted her shawl, and took a sip of freshly brewed warm tea. There wasn't a single bad feeling in her heart that afternoon. She believed her days would continue peacefully, filled with warmth and quiet laughter in the home she guarded with all her heart. That peace shattered instantly when the front doorbell rang loudly, over and over, impatiently, as if the visitor couldn't wait even a second. Emily frowned and set her teacup on the table. She wasn't expecting a package, and her husband Ryan wasn't due home yet. Calmly, she walked to the front door. When she opened the solid oak door, her eyes widened in shock. Standing before her were Margaret, her mother-in-law, and Hannah, her sister-in-law. They looked tired, but there was something in their eyes that made Emily uneasy. What shocked her even more was their luggage, 2 large suitcases and several carry bags stacked beside them, as if they weren't just visiting, but moving in. Emily hid her surprise behind the polite smile of a dutiful daughter-in-law. She greeted Margaret respectfully, then acknowledged Hannah, who was fanning herself from the heat. Without waiting to be invited, Margaret marched inside, dragging her suitcase across the floor. The wheels rattled loudly, breaking the home's tranquility. Hannah followed behind with a sour expression, her eyes scanning the house as if conducting an inspection. Emily closed the door and hurried to help with the bags. Inside, questions swirled in her mind. Why hadn't Ryan mentioned anything? Normally, he would have told her if his family planned to visit, especially with this much luggage. But Emily pushed the thought aside. As a host and a wife, she had to be welcoming. She invited them to sit on the plush sofa and offered cold drinks. The moment Margaret dropped herself onto the sofa, a painful incident occurred. Kiko, the friendly orange cat, awakened by the noise, walked over and rubbed against Margaret's leg in greeting. Margaret screamed. In a harsh reflex, she kicked Kiko, sending the small body flying several feet away. Kiko yowled in pain and terror before bolting to hide behind a chair. Lily jumped to her feet, tears pooling in her eyes. Emily froze, her chest pounding with restrained fury. Margaret immediately went on a rant, complaining about how disgusting she found furry animals. She called the house dirty, smelly, and unhealthy. Hannah joined in, sneering that Emily should know better than to keep stray animals inside when guests were present. Emily gently explained that the cats were vaccinated and regularly groomed, but her words fell on deaf ears. The complaints continued. The furniture arrangement was wrong. The curtains were ugly. The room wasn't cool enough. Overwhelmed, Emily excused herself to the kitchen, partly to prepare snacks and partly to calm herself. Her hands trembled as she poured drinks. From the living room, she heard Hannah laughing and whispering to her mother about rearranging the house to suit them. Emily exhaled deeply. This was not a simple visit. When Ryan came home that evening, Emily hoped for answers or support. She got neither. Ryan looked surprised to see his mother and sister, but said nothing. When Margaret announced they would be staying indefinitely because they missed him, Ryan simply nodded. Dinner that night was painfully tense. Margaret took the seat at the head of the table, the one Ryan usually occupied, asserting herself as the authority. She criticized Emily's cooking nonstop. Hannah scrolled on her phone, mocking the food. Lily ate in silence, eyes downcast. The cats hid under Lily's bed, sensing the hostility. Emily went to bed that night restless, realizing her peaceful life was under siege. Morning chaos began before sunrise. At 5 a.m., Emily was awakened by banging pots and Margaret's complaining voice. In the kitchen, Margaret was rummaging through cabinets, demanding a complicated special breakfast. Hannah soon joined, yelling for hot coffee like a boss barking orders. Emily swallowed her resentment and complied. Ryan praised Margaret's cooking, unaware Emily had done everything. As the days passed, Margaret and Hannah took over the house, rearranging furniture, blasting the TV, terrifying the cats. Hannah threw a pillow at them. Emily locked the cats in Lily's room to protect them, her heart breaking. They invaded Emily's private bedroom, used her belongings, broke her expensive lipstick, and called it sharing. Ryan stayed silent. They grew bolder. Finally, Hannah found cat hair on her pants and screamed like she'd been poisoned. Margaret exploded, accusing Emily of trying to make them sick. She issued an ultimatum to Ryan. "Choose, your mother or those cats." Ryan lowered his head. His silence was the cruelest answer of all. That evening, Emily stepped out briefly to buy fever medicine, and that was when everything changed. Because of the constant stress and fear of seeing her cats continuously terrorized, Lily began to feel unwell. Before leaving the house, Emily made sure Lily's bedroom door was tightly locked and that the cats were safely inside. She reminded Ryan to watch the house carefully and not allow anyone to enter Lily's room. Ryan nodded and promised to keep an eye on things. Still, a deep sense of unease settled in Emily's chest as she stepped outside the gate. Dark clouds hung low in the sky, mirroring the heaviness in her heart. She felt as though a cruel plan was being formed by her mother-in-law and sister-in-law in her absence. Yet she had no choice but to trust her husband. Emily quickened her pace toward the pharmacy, hoping she could return before anything terrible happened. She had no idea that while she was gone, the final line of defense in that house, Ryan, would be effortlessly overpowered by his mother's dominance, allowing a great disaster to befall what Lily and Emily cherished most. Emily hurried through the front yard as she returned home. The sky was completely dark now, and the porch light glowed dimly. The uneasy feeling that had followed her since leaving the pharmacy intensified into a racing heartbeat. An unnatural silence wrapped around the house. At this hour, the television was usually blaring Margaret's favorite soap opera, or Hannah's shrill laughter could be heard as she talked on the phone. But tonight, the house felt abandoned. Emily knocked, but no one answered. She unlocked the door using her spare key. As the door opened, cold air from the air conditioner rushed toward her face. The living room was empty. Hannah and Margaret's shopping bags, usually strewn carelessly across the floor, were gone, likely already moved into the guest room. Emily placed the fever medicine on the table and went straight to Lily's bedroom. She stopped abruptly. The door was wide open. Emily's blood ran cold. She clearly remembered locking that door before leaving and taking the key with her. The only spare key was kept on a hook near the kitchen, something only Ryan should have known about. She rushed inside. The sight before her made her knees weaken. The room was in chaos. Pillows and bolsters were scattered across the floor. Lily's blanket was roughly pulled aside. And most horrifying of all, the cat cage in the corner stood empty, its door forced open, the hinges bent. Milo, Luna, and Kiko were gone. Emily called their names with a trembling voice, checking under the bed, behind the wardrobe, even inside the bathroom. Nothing. The cats had vanished. Lily was gone too. Panic seized Emily. She ran to the master bedroom and found Ryan lying casually on the bed, staring at his phone as if nothing in the world was wrong. Emily shook his shoulder violently, demanding to know where Lily and the cats were. Ryan looked startled by her panic. In an overly relaxed tone, he said Lily was in the guest bathroom washing her face. As for the cats, he explained that his mother and Hannah were disturbed by the meowing, so they had temporarily moved him outside to keep the house quiet. He told Emily not to make a big deal out of it and suggested looking for the cats in the morning since it was already night. Emily stared at him in disbelief. How could a husband, how could a father allow this to happen while his wife was gone for just a short time? Before she could explode, a heart-wrenching cry echoed from the hallway. It was Lily, not a whiny cry, but a hysterical sob filled with terror and pain. Emily and Ryan ran out of the room. At the open door of Lily's bedroom, the little girl stood trembling, her face soaked with tears. In her small hand was a crumpled sheet of white paper, crushed tightly in her fist. Lily looked at her mother with a broken expression, lips shaking as she tried to speak. Emily pulled her into a tight embrace. Through her sobs, Lily handed the paper to her. With trembling hands, Emily unfolded it and read the harsh black marker handwriting she immediately recognized as Hannah's. The message was short, blunt, cruel. Your cats have been thrown away. We don't like cats. Don't make us uncomfortable living here. Time seemed to stop. That note wasn't just information, it was a declaration of war, proof of Margaret and Hannah's absolute lack of empathy, even towards a 9-year-old. Emily glanced toward the tightly closed guest room door. She could almost picture them inside, laughing in satisfaction, feeling victorious for eliminating what they hated without caring for the consequences. Ryan stood frozen after reading the note, his face pale, perhaps finally realizing that his mother and sister had gone far beyond acceptable limits. Lily continued crying, asking where Milo, Luna, and Kiko were. She feared her indoor cats, who had never been outside, would starve or be hit by cars. That night, there was no dinner. Emily took Lily into the master bedroom and soothed her until she fell asleep from exhaustion. Emily did not scream. She did not confront the guest room. Her anger had passed beyond shouting. It turned cold, lethal. She looked at Ryan sitting at the edge of the bed, guilt written all over his face, yet still silent, too cowardly to knock on his mother's door and demand accountability. That cowardice sealed Emily's resolve. She realized she could no longer rely on her husband to protect this home. She would act alone. When Ryan finally turned off the lights and went to sleep, facing away from her, Emily remained awake. She stared at the dark ceiling, then slowly reached for her phone beneath the pillow. She typed a short message to Mr. Samuel, the trusted neighborhood security guard who had worked there since Emily's parents were still alive. The instructions were firm. Find the cats tonight. Check the neighborhood CCTV system. Prepare the old storage shed behind the residential area, the former chicken coop. Emily would not sleep until justice was served. The digital clock showed 2 a.m. Ryan's steady breathing confirmed he was deeply asleep, having already forgotten the chaos of earlier that night. Emily rose carefully from the bed, moving so gently she wouldn't wake him. She put on a comfortable shawl and loose house clothes suitable for movement. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes were sharp, like a predator locked on its prey. She left the bedroom, closing the door silently. The house was pitch black, lit only by faint streetlights slipping through the windows. She moved toward the living room, the territory now occupied by Margaret and Hannah. She turned on her phone's flashlight, refusing to switch on the main lights. The guest room door was closed. She knew they were sleeping soundly, satisfied after breaking Lily's heart. Emily did not go to their room. She went for their belongings. Margaret's large suitcases still lay in the corner of the living room. Hannah's branded handbags, high heels scattered near the shoe rack, clothes draped carelessly over dining chairs. Emily stared at them with disgust. These objects symbolized their arrogance, the belief they could dominate someone else's home. She went to the kitchen and grabbed a large roll of heavy-duty black garbage bags, the kind used for yard waste. Then she began. Without hesitation, Emily opened Margaret's unlocked suitcase. She grabbed armfuls of dresses, house gowns, batik fabrics, no folding, no care, stuffing them violently into the trash bag like rotten waste. Underwear, toiletries, herbal medicines, everything went in. Next came Hannah's belongings, work bags, makeup kits, trendy outfits, all shoved into the same black bags. Dirty shoes mixed with party dresses, expensive perfume bottles were tossed carelessly in, likely cracking inside. In less than an hour, the living room was spotless. Only 5 bulging black garbage bags remained, tightly knotted. Emily dragged them one by one to the back gate, cold sweat dripping down her temples, but her heart felt satisfied. At the back gate, Mr. Samuel waited. He whispered the good news. The neighborhood security team had found Milo, Luna, and Kiko near the front security booth, hiding in bushes, dirty, terrified, but alive. They were now safe, fed, and secured. Emily exhaled in relief. She thanked him sincerely and made one final request: transport those 5 black garbage bags to the rented storage shed she had arranged earlier via text. Once Mr. Samuel left, Emily returned inside. Her work was not finished. She retrieved 5 new black bags and filled them with real garbage, wet kitchen waste, fruit peelings, food packaging, even wrapped used diapers, until they matched the previous bags in size. She arranged the 5 garbage bags in the middle of the living room, exactly where the suitcases once stood. The contrast was brutal. As a final touch, Emily took a red marker and a piece of cardboard from an old box, and in bold capital letters, mimicking Hannah's style, she wrote, "Your belongings have been thrown onto the garbage truck. I don't like parasites. Don't make me uncomfortable in my own house." She taped it to the top bag. She had been sitting there for nearly 2 hours without moving, her eyes constantly alert, fixed on the hallway leading to the guest room. The morning was eerily quiet, an unsettling contrast to the roaring satisfaction pounding inside Emily's chest. She savored every second of this silence, knowing it was the calm before the real storm broke. The wall clock showed it was just past morning. At this hour, Margaret usually woke up and immediately shouted Emily's name, demanding warm water or a fresh towel, as if Emily were a personal servant on 24-hour standby. At last, the moment arrived. The guest room door flew open roughly, sloppy footsteps approached. Hannah appeared first, yawning wide without bothering to cover her mouth. Her hair was wild like a lion's mane, her face still greasy from sleep. Behind her, Margaret shuffled along, rubbing her stiff neck. They walked toward the living room without looking around, likely heading for the kitchen to find breakfast. Then they stopped dead. Both froze, eyes bulging at the strange sight before them. 5 towering black garbage bags stood exactly where their suitcases and belongings were supposed to be. Hannah rubbed her eyes repeatedly, convinced she was still dreaming. Slowly, reality hit when she noticed the cardboard sign taped clearly to one of the bags, written in thick red marker. She stepped closer, squinting to read. Her lips moved silently first, then her voice rose higher and higher until it exploded into a hysterical scream that pierced the air. She read aloud that their belongings had been thrown away because they were considered parasites. Her scream was so loud it startled sparrows outside the window into frantic flight. Margaret panicked immediately. She rushed forward, read the message, and her face turned ghostly pale before flushing deep red with rage. She screamed Ryan's and Emily's names, shrieking accusations, calling them insane and brainless. Emily, who had been sitting quietly in the corner armchair all this time, finally placed her coffee cup on the table with a sharp clack, loud enough to draw their attention. She looked at them calmly, her face blank. No smile, no guilt, as if she were watching a boring daytime drama. Hannah, seeing Emily sitting so casually, lunged at the pile of garbage bags. In a blind fury, she tore one open with her long fingernails, desperate to find a designer bag or one of her party dresses inside. Her hope shattered instantly. What spilled out wasn't silk or leather, but rotting durian rinds, slimy spoiled rice, chicken bones from last night's dinner, and a used diaper. The stench exploded through the room. Hannah began coughing violently, stumbling backward while covering her nose. Brownish garbage liquid seeped onto the spotless white tiles. Margaret screamed in disgust and jumped on the sofa, terrified the filthy liquid would touch her feet. In the middle of the chaos, the master bedroom door opened. Ryan stepped out, half asleep, eyes squinting in confusion. Wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and shorts, he looked utterly lost. "What's going on? Why is it so noisy? What is that smell?" he asked hoarsely. Before he could get an answer, Margaret unleashed a barrage of curses, pointing at Emily and accusing her of throwing away their belongings. Ryan turned to Emily, silently asking for an explanation with a confused look. Emily stood slowly, smoothed her clothes, and walked toward the large glass window facing the street. Calmly, she pointed outside. In a voice that was steady, almost gentle, yet razor-sharp, Emily said that the yellow city sanitation truck had just driven past their house about a minute ago. She added that if they ran now, they might still catch it at the end of the gated neighborhood before it merged onto the main road and crushed everything at the landfill. At that moment, logic completely shut down for Margaret and Hannah. The thought of jewelry, hidden cash, and luxury items being destroyed by a garbage truck wiped out their ability to think rationally. Barefoot, without hesitation, they bolted through the front door, held wide open by Emily, screaming wildly, "Truck! Stop! Garbage truck!" They ran like possessed people down the pristine streets of the upscale neighborhood. The scene was tragic and ridiculous. Margaret in her loose batik house dress and Hannah in a tank-top pajama set with wild hair sprinted without caring about gravel stabbing into their feet. Neighbors watering plants, jogging, or warming up their cars stared in shock. Security guards on bicycle patrol stopped, mouths hanging open, watching the usually arrogant guests sprint after a truck that was long gone. Emily stood at the doorway, leaning casually with her arms crossed. Ryan stood beside her, still stunned, mouth agape, watching his mother and sister turn into public spectacle. Emily leaned toward him and whispered coldly, "This is what happens when someone disrupts peace in my home." That morning became unforgettable for the entire neighborhood and marked the beginning of Margaret and Hannah's complete humiliation. Half an hour later, the living room felt heavy and suffocating, mixed with lingering garbage odor, despite Emily having ordered Mr. Samuel to clean it thoroughly. Margaret and Hannah had returned. They sat panting on the front porch floor. Emily refused to let them back inside while they were filthy. Their appearance was pitiful, feet blackened with dust and small cuts, faces red with rage and humiliation, sweat soaked their sleepwear. They had failed to catch the garbage truck. They returned empty-handed, hearts burning. Margaret glared at Emily with pure hatred, like she wanted to devour her alive. Ryan, who had stood silent like a statue, finally tried to act as mediator. He brought 2 glasses of water to the porch. Hannah slapped the glasses away violently. They shattered on the floor. She stood up, pointed at Ryan's face, and screamed, demanding he divorce Emily immediately. She called Emily a disobedient wife, insane, a criminal who had thrown away property worth thousands of dollars. Margaret joined in, crying loudly, playing the role of the abused victim. She wailed about how she had given birth and raised Ryan with hardship, only to be humiliated by her wife. She threatened to curse him as an ungrateful son if he didn't kick Emily out immediately. Ryan looked shaken, his old habit of obedience resurfaced. He glanced at Emily pleadingly and began to speak. He asked Emily softly to apologize and take responsibility for replacing everything that was lost. He said her actions were excessive and disrespectful. Emily laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but a dry, bitter one. She looked at Ryan in a way that made him shrink. She didn't step back, she stepped forward. Standing tall at the porch entrance, looming over her husband and in-laws sitting on the floor, Emily disappeared briefly into the bedroom and returned carrying a thick green folder. She slammed it on the porch table with a heavy thud. "Open it," she told Ryan. "Read it out loud." With trembling hands, Ryan opened the folder. Inside were the property deed, the vehicle title, and documents for other valuable assets. Every single one bore one name only: Emily. No Ryan. Emily spoke loudly and clearly. She reminded them that the house was inherited from her parents. The car was purchased with her earnings before marriage. She had stayed silent out of respect, let him feel like the head of the household, allowed him to send his salary to his mother while she paid for utilities, living expenses, and Lily's school. She looked straight into Margaret's eyes and said she knew Margaret had belittled her to relatives, calling her a lucky daughter-in-law. The truth was the opposite. Ryan was the lucky one, living comfortably without rent or mortgage. Emily then exposed the real reason Margaret and Hannah had come. Their house back in town had been seized by the bank. Hannah's lifestyle debts had piled up. They planned to stay here permanently and push Emily out. Margaret and Hannah turned deathly pale. They hadn't expected Emily to know everything. Finally, Emily gave her ultimatum. She checked her watch. 1 hour, she said. Leave this house. If you're still here after that, I will call the police. She played CCTV footage on her phone, clearly showing Margaret kicking Kiko and Hannah violently throwing the cat cage. Emily explained that under the law, their actions constituted animal abuse, plus harassment and threats. The image of losing her party dresses, work handbags, and jewelry hidden between layers of fabric made Hannah break down again, sobbing uncontrollably as she mourned her sudden fall into poverty. Emily watched the two women in front of her with an expressionless gaze, difficult to read. She felt no pity. Any trace of compassion had died the moment she saw Lily's tears the night before. Still, Emily was not a monster who would truly discard someone else's belongings without a second thought. Though she had wanted to, badly, Emily took a long breath and finally broke the silence with a calm but firm voice. She told them that in truth, their belongings were never inside the yellow sanitation truck they had desperately chased earlier. Margaret and Hannah lifted their heads at the same time, their eyes widened, caught between hope and confusion. Emily explained that she was not as cruel as they were, people who could heartlessly abandon living creatures on the street. She had merely relocated the items that she considered eyesores in her home to a place more appropriate for them. She pointed toward the narrow path beside the house that led to the back of the gated community, toward an empty lot bordering the perimeter wall. Emily informed them that all their suitcases, bags, clothes, and personal belongings were inside an old storage shed that used to be a chicken coop owned by Mr. Sobari, a neighbor whose vacant land was often rented out to store scrap materials. The shed had long been abandoned, filthy, damp, and infamous for being infested with insects and rats. At the mention of a chicken coop, Hannah's face drained of color. She imagined her beloved leather bags covered in chicken droppings and thick dust. Yet her attachment to her possessions outweighed her disgust. Without offering thanks or farewells, Margaret and Hannah struggled to their feet. Their souls still sore and bare, they limped in the direction Emily indicated. Emily instructed Mr. Samuel, the community security guard stationed near the gate, to escort them to the shed and ensure they caused no further disturbance in the neighborhood. The walk to the shed became the most humiliating journey of Margaret and Hannah's lives. Though it was barely 200 meters from Emily's house, it felt like miles. Every step was accompanied by curious stares from neighbors stepping outside to begin their morning routines. Women sweeping their lawns whispered while pointing. Some residents openly recorded the scene with their phones. Margaret kept her head bowed low, trying to hide her burning face. Hannah walked with her messy hair covering her face. The same women who once strutted down this street with arrogance now moved like caught thieves, dirty, disheveled, and disgraced. When they arrived, the sight before them was pitiful. The shed was little more than a collapsing shack. Its walls were made of broken bamboo weaving, riddled with holes, and the rusted tin roof leaked badly. A musty stench mixed with animal waste assaulted their noses as Mr. Samuel unlocked the corroded padlock. Inside the dim space, their large black plastic bags lay scattered on the muddy ground. Cockroaches scared as sunlight spilled in. Hannah screamed hysterically when a small rat darted past the bags. Mr. Samuel merely stood at the doorway with his arms crossed, stating flatly that those were their belongings and they were to retrieve them themselves. His job was only to escort them. He reminded them that Emily had given them limited time and they should hurry before the community gates closed to unauthorized visitors. With a mix of revulsion and desperation, Margaret and Hannah began pulling the bags out of the suffocating shed. Their hands, once accustomed only to cutlery and makeup tools, now wrestled with thick dust and sticky mud. When Hannah opened one bag, she cried aloud upon seeing her expensive silk dress soaked by spilled shampoo from a broken bottle. Emily had packed everything carelessly: clean clothes mixed with dirty shoes, cosmetics tangled with underwear. Margaret found her suitcase, but one of its wheels had snapped from being dragged roughly the night before. They sorted through their belongings in the empty lot under the watchful eyes of free-roaming chickens pecking at the ground. After nearly half an hour, they managed to salvage what they could. They stuffed their things back into damaged suitcases as best as possible. The clothes were wrinkled, damp, and reeked of mold. Their own appearances were no better: Margaret's dress smeared with mud, Hannah's face streaked with dust, sweat, and tears. Dragging the heavy suitcases with their remaining strength, they returned toward the residential road. Their only hope was to be allowed back into Emily's house briefly, to shower, clean themselves, and gather their belongings before leaving for good. They believed Emily still had a conscience, that she wouldn't send her mother-in-law away looking like a homeless vagabond. That hope shattered when they reached the gate. The tall iron fence was firmly locked. Behind it stood Lily, holding Milo, the white cat. At her feet sat Luna and Kiko, calm and clean, their glossy fur starkly contrasting Margaret and Hannah's filthy appearance. Lily stared at her grandmother and aunt with an unreadable expression. The fear she once carried was gone, replaced by deep disappointment. There was no smile, only silence, as if she were looking at strangers. Emily stood behind her daughter, her hand protectively on Lily's shoulder. She did not open the gate. When Margaret called Lily's name in a hoarse, pleading voice, Lily turned away, hugged Milo tightly, and walked back into the house without looking back. The sight of Lily's retreating back struck Margaret like a brutal slap, a clear sign that she had lost her granddaughter forever due to her own selfishness. Emily then made a simple hand gesture, wordless, dismissive. Her cold stare ordered them to leave the sidewalk in front of her home immediately. Inside the living room, Ryan stood frozen, watching the scene through the large glass window. His heart was in turmoil, torn between guilt toward his mother and the harsh truth his wife had just forced him to face. Instinct urged him to run outside, unlock the gate, and bring his mother in. He had been raised to obey, to honor his parents no matter what. But as his foot moved forward, the image of Lily's hysterical crying the night before flooded his mind, the sound of his child sobbing over her beloved cat clashing with his mother's harsh insults towards Emily. Emily returned inside after ensuring Lily was safe in her room. She found Ryan pacing nervously. Emily stepped in front of him, blocking his view of the window, and looked straight into his eyes. Ryan begged her, his voice trembling, asking for permission just this once to let Margaret and Hannah inside to shower and change. He promised he would personally escort them to a cheap motel afterwards. He pleaded, reminding him that Margaret was still his mother. Emily listened without blinking. Then she took Ryan by the hand and led him to Lily's bedroom. Inside, Ryan witnessed a heartbreaking scene. Lily sat on the floor surrounded by Milo, Luna, and Kiko, apologizing repeatedly as she stroked Milo's head. She whispered that she promised never to let bad people hurt them again. The words "bad people," spoken by her own daughter to describe his mother, pierced Ryan's heart. Emily closed the door gently and turned to him. In a low but piercing voice, she asked him who he was supposed to protect now, his adult mother who consciously committed cruelty, or his wounded child whose safety he had failed to secure. Emily delivered her final ultimatum. If Ryan opened that gate, he would leave with them. He could choose to remain a devoted son to a toxic mother or become a husband and father who ended the cycle of abuse. Ryan stood still, cold sweat forming on his forehead. At last he exhaled deeply and picked up his phone, not to open the gate, but to call his mother. Margaret answered with hope in her eyes. That hope died within seconds. Ryan spoke through the phone, his voice shaking but resolute. He told her the door was closed. He apologized but said he could no longer comply with unreasonable demands. Emily was right. Margaret and Hannah had crossed every boundary. Ryan told them to leave, find their own place, and reflect on their actions. Ryan then delivered the hardest decision of all. Starting this month, he would no longer be sending large monthly allowances as he had in the past. Ryan had finally realized that the money he had been transferring all this time was not being used for his mother's basic needs, but instead to support Hannah's extravagant lifestyle and to cover her mounting debts. Ryan explained calmly that from now on he would only send enough money for basic meals, nothing more. He also informed Margaret that all additional financial access and supplementary credit cards previously held by Hannah had been permanently blocked by Emily. The primary source of those funds had always been Emily's income to begin with. Hearing this, Margaret screamed hysterically on the other end of the phone, cursing Ryan as an ungrateful son and threatening to end her life. But this time, Ryan did not waver. He had heard those threats far too many times, every time her wishes were denied. With steady hands, Ryan ended the call, turned off his phone completely, and placed it face down on the table. He turned to Emily, his eyes filled with tears. His face reflected unbearable pain, pain from standing up against his own mother, but also a sense of relief, because for the first time in his life, he had chosen to take a stand. Outside the gate, Margaret and Hannah raged briefly, pounding their fists against the iron bars. There was no response from inside the house. Mr. Samuel, who was still on duty, stepped forward and warned them firmly that he would call the local police patrol if they continued causing a disturbance. Ashamed of being watched and realizing Ryan would not come out, they finally gave up. With the last remaining battery on her phone, Hannah ordered a rideshare car. A few minutes later, the vehicle arrived. The driver hesitated upon seeing their dirty, foul-smelling appearance, but after a brief argument, reluctantly let them in. The car slowly drove away from Emily's house, carrying with it the two sources of chaos that had turned everything upside down over the past 2 days. Emily exhaled deeply as she watched the car disappear around the corner. She walked toward Ryan, who had collapsed onto the sofa, his face buried in his hands. Emily sat beside him, saying nothing, simply placing her hand on his back in silent support. She knew Ryan was grieving the loss of the illusion of a happy family he had desperately tried to preserve. But Emily also knew that this painful moment was a necessary first step toward healing their marriage. Ryan looked up at her, his voice breaking as he whispered apologies over and over again. Emily gently nodded, forgiving him, but deep in her heart she promised herself to remain vigilant. Today's victory was not the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one in which Ryan would have to prove that he had truly changed and was worthy of leading this household. 1 week later. 1 week after the dramatic eviction that had shaken the Aileywood residential community, Margaret and Hannah found themselves living a reality far removed from their former dreams. In a narrow, overcrowded alley on the outskirts of the city, they now occupied a tiny rented unit with damp walls and peeling paint. There was no air conditioning, only an old, creaking fan that rotated slowly, barely moving the stifling air. The room was hot, humid, and filled with the stench of an open drainage ditch outside the door. The luxury items they had salvaged from the abandoned shed were now piled messily in one corner, making the already cramped space feel suffocating. The suitcases still carried a musty odor no matter how many times they were wiped, a silent reminder of their humiliation. Their downfall was not just financial, their dignity had been completely destroyed. Videos of them running barefoot through the neighborhood, screaming hysterically while chasing a garbage truck, had been recorded by residents and spread rapidly through local community chat groups. The footage went viral on regional social media platforms under a humiliating title labeling them "new money elites having a breakdown." Margaret and Hannah's faces were clearly visible, becoming the laughingstock of thousands of strangers. Cruel comments flooded the posts, mocking their behavior as unstable and disgraceful. Overwhelmed by shame, Hannah locked herself inside the rental unit for days, silencing her phone notifications to avoid reading the ridicule from her former socialite friends she had once tried to impress. Those same friends soon blocked her one by one, unwilling to be associated with such public disgrace. Then came the next brutal blow: finances. Ryan kept his word. On payday, a transfer notification appeared on Margaret's phone. The amount made her eyes widen in shock. It had dropped drastically, just enough to cover the cheap rent and basic meals. There was no disposable income, no shopping sprees, no salon treatments. Hannah tried calling Ryan, crying and begging for extra money, claiming illness or proposing business ideas. But Ryan's number was unreachable. He had changed his personal contact and completely cut them off. Emily had also canceled every secondary credit card Hannah had secretly used to accumulate debt on designer items. Now the bills began to arrive at the new address, tracked down by aggressive debt collectors. Their days were filled with terrifying knocks at the door. Tension inside the small rental escalated daily. With no money and no comfort, their true natures surfaced. Margaret blamed Hannah's extravagance and sharp tongue for provoking Emily's fury, repeatedly bringing up the threatening letter Hannah had written. Hannah blamed her mother's entitled behavior, demanding to be treated like royalty, for getting them expelled. Their shouting matches echoed through the thin walls, further isolating them from neighbors who now regarded them with open hostility. The peak of Hannah's social karma came when she applied for a job at a clothing boutique downtown. Confident in her appearance, she believed she could work as a sales associate. During the interview, though, the boutique owner studied her carefully, then recognized her from the viral garbage truck video and rumors circulating in the city's animal welfare community. Without hesitation, the owner rejected her application and asked her to leave, stating she did not want her business associated with someone known for public misconduct and animal cruelty. Hannah walked out of the boutique with her face burning, holding back tears in the middle of the mall. Her digital footprint had become an impenetrable wall blocking her future. Meanwhile, Margaret fell ill. Stress and drastic changes in lifestyle took their toll. Accustomed to luxurious meals and soft mattresses, now she ate cheap takeout rice and slept on a thin foam mat on the floor. Her body ached, her blood pressure rose. In her sickness, she often muttered Ryan's name, hoping her son would come and take her back to Emily's house. But he never came. Emily made sure Ryan stayed firm. Only then did Margaret fully feel the weight of her loneliness. She realized she had sacrificed genuine love for greed and ego. Now, in her old age, she was trapped with a daughter just as selfish as herself, with no one who truly cared. The wealth she chased was gone. The family meant to protect her had been irreparably wounded. Their lives became a repetitive cycle of regret by day and fear by night. Hannah was forced to sell her once prized handbags and clothes at a flea market for humiliatingly low prices just to survive. Each time a vendor ruthlessly bargained down the price, her heart ached remembering how arrogantly she had once flaunted those same items in Emily's home. Karma had arrived, quietly, elegantly, and painfully, stripping away every false pride they had built. They became two forgotten women, swallowed by the noise of the city, drowning in regret that came too late. 1 month later, 1 month after the eviction, Emily's home had transformed back into a peaceful sanctuary. The morning air was fresh, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and warm food drifting from the kitchen. There were no harsh shouts, no complaints, no lingering fear. Sunlight poured freely through the open windows, illuminating the spotless floors where Milo, Luna, and Kiko chased each other joyfully. The cats had fully recovered from their trauma. Their fur gleamed once more, and they no longer hid under beds. They roamed freely, sleeping on sofas, sunbathing on the terrace, exactly as they should. She had forgiven, but she would never forget. The door of forgiveness remained open, yet the door of her home was firmly shut. Emily had drawn a clear boundary. The mental peace of her family was a non-negotiable priority. Ryan, too, had finally accepted the release of the excessive burden he had carried for years, the misplaced sense of responsibility toward his mother. He surrendered it all to fate and to the consequences his mother had chosen for herself. After breakfast, the three of them sat casually on the back porch, facing their small, lush garden. Emily sipped her warm tea while watching Ryan and Lily gently brushing Luna's fur. A soft breeze brushed against her face, carrying with it an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her mind drifted back to those dark days, 2 days that had felt like hell, and how swiftly everything had turned around, all because she had found the courage to act. Emily realized that being a patient woman did not mean remaining silent while being trampled on. True patience has limits, and when those limits are crossed, a wife and mother possesses a formidable strength to fight, to protect, and to defend those she loves. This house was not merely a family inheritance. It was a fortress, a sanctuary she was determined to guard, its peace and sanctity protected from anyone with malicious intent. Suddenly, Lily ran toward Emily, wrapping her arms tightly around her mother's neck and planting a kiss on her cheek. The child whispered her thanks for being a hero to Milo, Luna, and Kiko. Ryan stepped closer, wrapping an arm around Emily's shoulders and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. In a low voice, he thanked her for opening his eyes, for standing firm, and for not giving up on their marriage even when he himself had been foolish. That moment felt complete. Their 3 cats jumped onto the garden chairs, curling up comfortably near their owners. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, soaking in the warmth of the sun and the abundance of love surrounding her. The story settled into a powerful truth within Emily's heart. No matter how small, every wrongdoing eventually meets its consequence, and kindness, when paired with firm principles, always leads to true peace. Emily gazed at the clear blue sky and smiled in quiet satisfaction. She had won this battle without violence, without staining her hands, only through intelligence and courage. Her home had returned to what it was meant to be, a true castle where only love, respect, and compassion were allowed inside. The shameless guests had become nothing more than a painful lesson of the past, and now a bright future stretched wide before her small family. Emily set down her empty teacup, ready to welcome the days ahead, with a heart light, victorious, and at peace. 12 months later. 12 months had passed since the great storm had shaken Emily's marriage. Time, it seemed, worked in mysterious ways. It healed those willing to grow and change, but slowly eroded those who chose to cling to resentment. It was a bright weekend afternoon. Emily, Ryan, and Lily were strolling through a large shopping mall in the heart of the city. They looked harmonious, refreshed, and content. Emily wore an elegant pastel dress, her shawl draped gracefully over her shoulders. Ryan looked confident in a neatly pressed casual shirt. Lily walked between them, holding both her parents' hands, her face glowing with joy. There was no trace of fear or tension on their faces. They laughed freely as Lily excitedly recounted how Milo had tried and failed to catch a gecko on the wall the night before, slipping and falling in the process. It was a portrait of happiness, simple yet priceless. As they headed toward Lily's favorite restaurant on the upper floor, Emily's steps slowed. From a distance, near the budget food court filled with plastic trays and crowded tables, her eyes caught sight of two very familiar figures. Her heart tightened, not with anger, but with quiet sorrow. At one of the grimy tables sat Margaret and Hannah. They looked nothing like the women Emily remembered. Margaret appeared far older than her years. Her once carefully dyed hair had turned gray and unkempt. Deep wrinkles carved her face, radiating exhaustion and bitterness. Her clothes were dull and worn, washed so many times their colors had faded. The gold jewelry she once flaunted was gone. No bracelets, no necklaces. Beside her, Hannah sat stirring a drink in a cheap plastic cup, her gaze empty. The young woman who once lived in designer clothes and heavy makeup was barely recognizable. Her face was bare, revealing dark circles and neglected skin. She wore a plain t-shirt and frayed jeans. They were not sharing a warm conversation. Instead, they were engaged in a tense argument, their voices low but sharp. From Margaret's lip movements, it was clear she was scolding Hannah, most likely about money. Hannah responded with irritation and indifference. It was the very definition of unhappiness. They remained trapped in a cycle of blame, living together in scarcity without even a trace of peace. Ryan stopped walking. His body stiffened as he watched his own mother wiping sweat from a used napkin she had picked up from the table. Pain pulsed in his chest, the instinctive ache of a son wanting to help. But then Ryan looked down at Lily, smiling up at him. He glanced at Emily, standing calm and steady beside him. Memories flooded back, nights filled with Lily's hysterical cries and the cruelty with which his mother had shattered her child's happiness. Ryan knew then, approaching them again would only drag poison back into the life his family had worked so hard to heal. He had already sent monthly financial support in dollars as promised, enough for food and modest rent. That was the limit of his duty. Emily gently touched Ryan's arm, silently asking him if he wanted to greet them. Ryan took a deep breath and shook his head firmly. He tightened his grip on Emily's and Lily's hands, turned his back on the painful sight, and whispered that they should head to the restaurant. Lily was hungry. That decision was his final affirmation. He did not hate his mother, but he chose to love his wife and child by keeping his distance from the source of their wounds. They walked away, leaving Margaret and Hannah still arguing over spare change, completely unaware that the chance for a happy life had just passed them by and disappeared into the crowd. That evening, the house felt warmer than usual. Lily ran inside and immediately hugged her cats. Milo, Luna, and Kiko greeted them at the door, purring and rubbing against Ryan and Emily's legs. Emily sat on the sofa, gazing around her living room, clean, orderly, and serene. She reflected on what she had witnessed at the mall. She did not feel victorious seeing their suffering. She felt relieved that her firm decision a year ago had saved her family's future. She understood now, removing toxic elements from one's life, whether objects or people, is not cruelty. It's self-defense. Ryan returned with 2 cups of warm tea, sat beside Emily, and rested his head on her shoulder. No words were necessary. The silence spoke volumes. Somewhere out there, Margaret and Hannah might be lamenting their fate in a cramped, overheated rental room, blaming the world for their misfortune. But here, inside this blessed home, Emily, Ryan, Lily, and their cats lived in enduring peace. Karma had completed its work flawlessly, placing everyone exactly where they belonged, according to what they had sown. And for Emily, this was the true happy ending, a home not only beautiful to look at, but deeply peaceful to live in.